They said it was a routine check, just another call in a quiet neighborhood. But when the patrol car screeched to a stop and two officers jumped out, guns drawn, it became something else entirely. A woman in gym clothes, helping her elderly neighbor load groceries, suddenly found herself face down on the pavement. No questions, no explanations, just cold metal cuffs digging into her wrists and knees pressed into her back as she struggled to breathe. Her name? Jasmine Cole. Her crime? She fit the description. Not of a specific person, just of someone. Someone black. Someone walking while black in a neighborhood that still whispers behind closed doors. The kind of place where power wears a smile during the day and a badge at night. This wasn't her first encounter with injustice, but this time it was personal. Because Jasmine wasn't just another resident. She wasn't a tourist or a stranger. She was a federal agent, an FBI investigator, sent to expose corruption inside the very department that now had her pinned to the ground. And the clock was ticking. 7 minutes. That's how long it took for everything to change, for truth to slice through the silence, for the real story to begin unraveling. Across the street, someone filmed the entire thing. A retired veteran, Mr. Ramon Torres, watched in disbelief as the woman who had helped shovel his driveway last winter was treated like a criminal. The footage would soon go viral, triggering national outrage, hashtags demanding accountability, and a public reckoning no one saw coming. But in this moment, Jasmine said nothing. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She stared up at the sky, listening to the officers joke and justify their actions. One of them muttered, "She must have done something." The other laughed. They always do. And just like that, they reminded us how easily dignity can be erased, how authority, unchecked, becomes danger. This is not just about one woman. It's about a system that too often fails the very people it claims to protect. It's about civil rights, racial profiling, and what happens when accountability meets arrogance. But most of all, it's about what Jasmine did next. Because within 7 minutes, everything they thought they knew about her, about power, about justice, about control, was about to be flipped on its head. Stay with us. Because this isn't just a story of injustice, it's a lesson in what real authority looks like. And when the truth finally steps in, it doesn't knock. It kicks the door down. Jasmine Cole didn't choose Millstone by accident. It was quiet, distant from the noise of the city, with carefully trimmed lawns and a population that prided itself on tradition. But under its pristine surface, the town simmered with tension, unspoken, unchecked, and protected by a network of good old boys in uniform. That's exactly why the FBI sent her there. Jasmine was no rookie. With over a decade of experience investigating civil rights violations and police misconduct, she had built a reputation as the Bureau's quiet weapon, precise, methodical, unshakable. She didn't need sirens or spotlights. She needed silence, access, and time. Millstone offered all three. Under the guise of a private data analyst, she rented a modest home on the edge of Oakview Avenue, moved in without fanfare, and melted into the background. But she saw everything. And more importantly, she recorded everything. From day one, she noticed the patterns. Traffic stops disproportionately targeting Black and Latino drivers, routine searches at the grocery store that mysteriously skipped white customers, and reports of missing body camera footage following altercations that somehow always ended with someone of color in the hospital, or worse. But the real target wasn't the street officers. It was Lieutenant Russell Keller, head of the Community Enforcement Division. Charming in public, ruthless behind closed doors. His unit had racked up complaints for excessive force, evidence tampering, and harassment, yet somehow remained protected. Jasmine's job was to change that. And she was close. For 6 months, she had quietly gathered footage, interviews, digital forensics, and whistleblower testimonies. She had recorded Keller giving off-the-record orders to intimidate activists, She had evidence of falsified arrest reports. She even intercepted encrypted messages that suggested a broader network of cover-ups involving the police union and a local judge. The case was ready. But something had gone wrong. Just 24 hours before her planned submission to the DOJ, she received a signal from her supervisor. The case was green-lit for federal action. Jasmine smiled, knowing justice was finally catching up. She encrypted her files, uploaded them to a secure cloud server, and prepared to disappear from Millstone forever. One last trip to the market. One last favor for her elderly neighbor. Then she'd vanish back into the shadows, letting the Bureau do its work. But they moved first. Unbeknownst to her, someone inside the department had caught wind of a mole, and when they traced the metadata from a corrupted email attachment, the IP address led right back to Oakview Avenue. Right back to Jasmine. She had walked straight into a setup. Her cover still held officially, but on the ground, Keller wasn't waiting for paperwork. He sent out a vague all-units alert to locate and detain suspicious persons matching intel leaks. No names, no warrants, just a green light for plausible deniability. And 2 eager officers took the bait. Now, as Jasmine sat cuffed in the back of a patrol car, she stayed calm, calculating. The inside of the cruiser smelled of stale coffee and dust, the plastic partition pressing into her knees. One officer chuckled nervously, while the other kept glancing at the rear-view mirror, confused by her silence. They didn't know what to make of her. She wasn't yelling, wasn't crying. She was watching, measuring, listening. Back at her house, the groceries she never got to unload sat melting on the porch. Her neighbor, Mr. Torres, stood frozen in shock. He had seen Jasmine help carry his wife to the ER when no ambulance came. He had seen her pick up trash along the curb, volunteer at the local library, and tutor kids after school. And now he had seen her dragged away like a fugitive. Something inside him shifted. He pulled out his phone and uploaded the video he had just recorded to his private account. Then he hit share. Meanwhile, inside the cruiser, Jasmine's fingers shifted slightly in the cuffs, not out of panic, but out of rhythm. A silent pattern tapped into her palms. Morse, a signal embedded in her skin. It was time. As the cruiser made its way down Millstone Parkway, Jasmine remained still, but her mind raced. Years of tactical training told her to wait. Patience wasn't just a virtue. It was survival. She glanced at the dashboard. No camera, no audio logs. This wasn't a procedure. This was off-book. Her instincts confirmed what she already suspected. Keller wasn't sending her to booking. He was sending her to vanish. She shifted her wrist slightly, and the embedded chip in her bracelet, standard issue for undercover agents, pinged its last known GPS location to a secure FBI satellite channel. One tap, then silence. The window of opportunity was closing. The officers made small talk up front. One mentioned something about fitting the profile, while the other muttered, "Keller said this one's priority." Jasmine almost smirked. They still didn't realize who they were transporting. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. Either way, the mistake wasn't hers. It was theirs. They didn't know how close they were to national disgrace. But someone else did. Inside a concrete government building 50 miles away, Special Agent in Charge Howard Whitmore glanced down at his tablet. Jasmine's emergency ping had just gone active. He froze mid-sentence during a budget meeting, muttered, "I need the room," and called the command center. "Pull the secure node on Agent 6473. Activate Black Echo Protocol. Immediate deployment." In under 3 minutes, 3 black Suburbans left the federal facility with sirens dark and windows tinted. They weren't coming for answers. They were coming for extraction. Meanwhile, in the car, Jasmine spoke. "You know, you're going to regret this." The officer in the passenger seat turned, irritated. "What did you say?" Jasmine held his gaze. "I said 7 minutes." That's how long it takes for a federal response unit to triangulate my location. You just used 6. The driver scoffed. Lady, shut up. But his partner's face paled slightly. Something about her tone, too calm, too measured, felt off. He reached for the police radio. Dispatch, we're en route with the suspect. Do we have a case file yet? Static, then silence. Then, negative. Stand by for further. He tried again, still nothing. Back in Millstone, the video Mr. Torres had posted hit 1,000 views. Then 10,000. Then it landed on a local reporter's Twitter feed, and then a national civil rights lawyer's inbox. By the 7th minute, the video had over 90,000 views. Hashtags formed. Hashtag Justice for Jasmine. Hashtag Wrong Woman. FBI and Millstone. The algorithm, hungry for outrage and justice content, boosted it. And then came the quote tweet. This woman helped expose corrupt policing in Westfield last year. If they've taken her, this is bigger than we know. Inside the cruiser, Jasmine closed her eyes. The car turned off the main road and onto a dirt path that led behind the old mill, the kind of place that didn't show up on maps, that had no streetlights and no cameras, just trees, mud, and whispers. But as the car slowed to a stop, the woods filled with a new sound, a low rolling rumble, tires, multiple sets. Then the doors slammed, then boots. Jasmine smiled for the first time that day. 7 minutes were up. A knock came on the cruiser window. It wasn't local law enforcement. It was a man in a dark tactical vest with federal agent emblazoned across his chest. Step out of the vehicle, he said calmly to the driver. Now! Confused, the driver hesitated. Who the hell are you? The federal agent showed his ID. I'm the man who just watched you kidnap my undercover agent on a live stream viewed by over 100,000 people. Open the door. The 2 officers froze. Jasmine tilted her head. I told you. She didn't need to raise her voice. The facts spoke louder than any badge. The standoff behind the old mill lasted less than 30 seconds, but it cracked the illusion of control that Millstone's police department had built for years. When the driver finally unlocked the cruiser, Jasmine stepped out with her hands still cuffed, her body bruised but her posture upright. Her eyes met Special Agent Whitmore's with a flicker of defiance and dry humor. Took you long enough, she said. Whitmore didn't return the smile. I had to wait for the live stream to confirm your face. Legal wants it clean. The 2 local officers stood frozen, pale and stuttering half-explanations that no one asked for. Whitmore didn't bother engaging. You have just illegally detained a federal investigator on an active DOJ assignment. Your radios were jammed for a reason. You were being watched from the moment you pulled up on Oakview. The taller officer's hand twitched toward his belt. Instantly, 3 federal agents raised their weapons. Don't, Whitmore warned. The officer blinked, realizing this wasn't the county's usual game of threats and immunity. This was the full weight of the federal government crashing down on their small-town authority. Jasmine turned to the younger cop, Nolan, mid-30s, the same one who had jammed her face into the cruiser window and smirked while doing it. He couldn't meet her eyes now. She took a step closer, wrists still bound. You asked earlier if I'd done something. Let me answer now. Her voice cut like a blade wrapped in silk. I've dismantled 5 departments like yours before lunch, and I was about to make this one the 6th. Nolan's throat bobbed. The trees behind them were silent, but the phone in Mr. Torres's hands kept recording every second. That video, already viral, now had a sequel, one that would be played on every news network by sunset. Back at Millstone PD, phones lit up like slot machines. Dispatchers whispered. Officers hovered around computer screens watching the footage, some stunned, others panicked. Then came the email. Internal systems locked. All user access revoked. A message blinked across their monitors. Federal seizure in progress. Comply immediately. Chief Harmon cursed under his breath as he slammed his office door and called Keller. She wasn't just some activist, he hissed. She was FBI. Keller's voice, usually smooth and sarcastic, now cracked. I'm handling it. But the clock was ticking, and Jasmine had left no loose ends. Keller's next move was a fatal miscalculation. Thinking he could intercept the convoy and silence Jasmine before she reached a federal office, he charged out of the department, past a waiting news van, and into the parking lot, only to walk directly into a second convoy of federal vehicles already securing the building. Whitmore stepped forward with measured steps. Lieutenant Russell Keller, he announced, holding up a sealed indictment. You are under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and abuse of power under color of law. Keller's mouth twisted into something between a smirk and a sneer. This is a mistake. Whitmore unlocked his phone and tapped the screen. Audio played. Keller's voice, unmistakable. Delete the body cam. I don't care what she said. She's not one of us. More audio followed. Orders to falsify arrests. Target minority neighborhoods. Retaliate against journalists. You weren't being clever, Whitmore said, locking eyes with him. You were being recorded. At the federal field office, Jasmine sat at the center of a sterile interview room. But this time she wasn't the subject. She was the architect. Around her, evidence bags were stacked. Keller's hard drives, seized files, burner phones, an encrypted radio labeled MK unit. Agents moved methodically, cataloging every item. One of them stopped when Jasmine reached into her coat and pulled out a sealed envelope. This is from Officer Graves, she said, sliding it across the table. He flipped 3 days ago. Inside was an affidavit from a former insider detailing how judges and prosecutors in Millstone had suppressed misconduct reports in exchange for favors, campaign endorsements, and silence. A heavy silence filled the room. Then someone finally said it. We're going to need to escalate this to D.C. But Jasmine didn't ask for glory. She didn't appear on the morning shows or grant interviews. Instead, 3 days later, she walked quietly into the Millstone Town Hall meeting, unannounced. Her face was no longer just the woman in the video. It was the woman who exposed a broken machine. As she stood before a crowd of townspeople, some ashamed, some angry, some still in denial, she didn't flinch. I moved here because I believed change could happen from the inside, and I stayed because I knew silence helps no one. You all saw what was happening. You just didn't want to be the one to speak first. The room was still. One man in the crowd stood up. He was old, maybe in his 70s, wearing a pressed plaid shirt and holding his cap in both hands. Ma'am, he said slowly, I've been living here my whole life. I've seen things, yeah, but we didn't think we could change it. We didn't know how. Jasmine's eyes didn't waver. You always knew, she said. You just chose comfort over justice. The words weren't shouted, but they hit harder than any megaphone. Because they were true. Outside the town hall, press vans lined the street. The story had already made headlines across the country. Undercover FBI agent exposes local police corruption. Federal operation uncovers years of civil rights abuses in Millstone. Journalists begged for statements, but Jasmine walked straight past them. Her job wasn't to perform, it was to rebuild what had been broken. What came next would take months, maybe years. Court proceedings, appeals, new leadership, a federal monitor for the police department. But the hardest part wasn't the legal work. It was confronting a community that had allowed injustice to fester in silence. The final turn came not in a courtroom or press conference, but in a classroom. 2 weeks after the operation, Jasmine visited Millstone High School. She wasn't in uniform. No gun, no badge, just a navy blazer and a flash drive. In a senior civics class, she plugged in the file and played a video, a compilation of testimonies from the town's own residents, Black and brown, young and old, all describing years of profiling, fear, and humiliation. The room was silent. No one had ever asked them to watch their own neighbors speak truth. When the lights came back on, Jasmine faced the students. "This system doesn't fix itself," she said. "It gets worse until someone risks enough to stop it. That risk can be a word, a video, a vote, or a career. But you decide when the silence ends." One student raised her hand, a quiet girl in the back row with big eyes and braids. "Were you scared?" she asked. Jasmine paused, then nodded. "Every day. But fear can't make your choices for you. If it does, you're just a uniform without a mission, a badge without a backbone." She looked at the teacher. "They're going to inherit this town. Let's make sure they don't inherit the same silence." Back outside, the sun hung low. Jasmine stepped into her unmarked car. A fresh case file lay on the seat beside her. Another town, another name, another system. But Millstone would never forget her, not just because she wore a badge, but because when everything went wrong, she stood up, not for herself, but for truth. And truth didn't flinch. 3 days after the town hall, Jasmine Cole sat quietly in a soundproof federal conference room, staring at the wall-mounted screen as documents scrolled past. What had begun as a localized operation to investigate civil rights violations in one police department had now unraveled into something far bigger. Multi-county corruption, suppressed evidence, bribed local judges, and a powerful union legal team preparing to fight back with everything they had. But Jasmine wasn't flinching. What no one outside the Bureau knew yet was this: she hadn't come to Millstone alone. The entire operation was part of Project Quiet Verdict, a federal initiative to expose coordinated abuses in small-town law enforcement systems, especially those shielded by decades of insider deals and old money politics. Millstone was never just a target, it was a test, and Jasmine had passed. But now came the real twist. The DOJ's Civil Rights Division had quietly moved Jasmine into a lead advisory role. She was no longer just gathering intel, she was now spearheading litigation strategy. From behind the scenes, she was assembling case files against not just Keller and his team, but against the web of enablers behind them. Judges who had dismissed valid complaints without review, prosecutors who refused to indict abusive officers, and even a state senator whose campaign was largely funded by the same police union now lawyering up. Every name, every dollar trail, every sealed file, Jasmine and her team were tracing it all. The officers who once dragged her into the cruiser were now each facing internal review. Officer Nolan, whose casual racism had once gone unchecked, had turned whistleblower when federal investigators uncovered damning texts on his phone. "I didn't sign up for this," he told Jasmine during an off-the-record debrief. "They told us to profile people who didn't look like they belonged, and if we didn't, we got reassigned. Or worse." Jasmine listened, not to excuse him, but to understand the ecosystem of fear and ambition that allowed corruption to thrive. "You still made your choice," she said firmly, "but now you have a chance to make a different one." Meanwhile, outside the system, the response from the public was volcanic. Civil rights attorneys filed federal suits on behalf of residents who had been wrongfully detained over the years. Jasmine, ever discreet, provided redacted evidence to support several of these cases. One video, showing a terrified teenager being pulled over and screamed at by 3 officers for looking suspicious, went viral within hours of being released. Paired with Jasmine's investigation, it became impossible for the town to deny the pattern of abuse. Local businesses, once silent, began issuing public apologies. Donations to criminal justice reform funds spiked. One church in town changed its sign to read, "Speak, even if your voice shakes." But the most profound twist came when Jasmine received an anonymous package at the Bureau. Inside was a handwritten letter and a flash drive. The note read, "I couldn't live with it anymore." The drive contained an audio recording from 2018, Judge Franklin Bowers in conversation with Lieutenant Keller. The judge could be heard instructing Keller to get rid of complaint records against a particularly vocal community organizer. "She's making too much noise," he said. "Do what you have to. Just keep it quiet." The organizer had died weeks later in a car accident, many considered suspicious. With this new evidence, the DOJ reopened the case, not just as a wrongful death, but as a potential conspiracy to obstruct justice. Jasmine sat in her office listening to the tape again and again. The calmness in the judge's voice, the casual cruelty. She clenched her jaw. This wasn't a bad apple. It was an orchard. In response, Jasmine held her first public press conference, not because she wanted attention, but because the story had grown too big to hide. She stood at the podium, sharp in a navy suit, reporters hanging on every word. "This isn't about one officer or even one department," she said. "It's about a system that, when left unexamined, becomes its own predator. What happened in Millstone happens in quiet places all across America, where accountability is treated like an insult and silence is rewarded with promotions. But not anymore. Not here." A reporter asked, "Do you consider yourself a hero?" Jasmine shook her head. "No. I consider myself a public servant who did her job. The real heroes are the people who live under systems like this every day and still find the courage to speak, to resist, to survive." Another reporter called out, "What's next for you?" Jasmine paused. "Millstone was just one piece of the puzzle, and I've got a whole map in front of me now." Back in town, the impact of her work had begun to ripple through everyday life. Several officers resigned. A new interim police chief, an outsider with a civil rights background, was appointed. Mandatory body cam policies were enforced. The local community center created a civilian oversight board. Jasmine didn't need to supervise. She trusted the groundwork. Instead, she returned to her bureau office, readying for the next mission. But even as systems reformed, not everyone embraced the change. One night, while leaving the building, Jasmine noticed slashed tires on her government car. A small note was tucked beneath the windshield. No threats, just 2 words. "Wrong side." Jasmine held the note for a moment, then let it flutter to the pavement. "There's no wrong side," she whispered, "unless you're scared of the truth." In that moment, she understood something deeper. Exposing the system isn't the end. It's just the beginning. Because for every Keller taken down, there are 10 more waiting in line, cloaked in authority and protected by public indifference. But now, that indifference was breaking. And Jasmine Cole had become a name that signaled change, not just in policy, but in public will. The sun was just beginning to rise over D.C. when Jasmine Cole stood on the rooftop of the Bureau building, coffee in hand, watching the city come alive. She had just closed the Millstone case with a 94-page federal report that would be cited in law schools for years. The headlines had already moved on. New crises, new names. But her work wasn't about headlines. It was about what happened after the cameras left. That quiet moment when a kid walked into school knowing their community finally listened. When a mother no longer flinched at sirens in the night. When the law started to mean protection, not persecution. Jasmine wasn't naive. She knew the system wasn't fixed. It never would be, not entirely. But it had cracked, and through that crack, something new could grow. As she looked out over the city, her phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Torres in Millstone. Just 3 words. "Thank you, Agent." She smiled softly, remembering the look in his eyes that day. The pain, the shame, the quiet courage it took to hit record instead of turning away. He had no badge, no legal training, no power. Just his phone and his conscience. But sometimes that's all it takes. In a world where police brutality, racial profiling, and systemic abuse too often go unchecked, Jasmine's story was more than a federal win. It was a moral reckoning. And not just for those in uniform, but for every bystander who ever said, "It's not my place." Because the truth is, silence protects no one. For years, Jasmine had walked into rooms where she was underestimated, too black, too female, too composed. But behind that calm face was a storm, one powered by every injustice she had witnessed, every family she had comforted, every closed case she swore she'd reopen one day. She wasn't loud, she was deliberate, and that made her dangerous to people who relied on chaos to stay hidden. She thought of the young girl who had asked if she was scared. Yes, she had been. Still was, sometimes. But fear wasn't the enemy. Apathy was. In the end, Jasmine didn't bring down Millstone's corrupt system with a gun or a badge. She did it with the truth, and the will to act on it. And in doing so, she reminded the world of a lesson it keeps trying to forget. Real justice doesn't come when the powerful allow it. It comes when the persistent demand it. If you've watched this far, maybe you feel that too. Maybe you've seen injustice where you live, heard it in a hallway, felt it in a traffic stop, witnessed it in a store. The question is, what will you do with that moment? Because you don't need to be an FBI agent to hold the line. You just need to see what's wrong and refuse to let it stand. My name is Jasmine Cole, and I don't carry a badge to feel important. I carry it because someone has to. If this story moved you, share it. Speak on it. And remember, silence changes nothing, but you might. Subscribe to Radio Life Stories for more powerful stories that reveal truth, justice, and the strength of dignity in the face of power. We don't just tell stories. We expose the system, one truth at a time.